Wendell Felder. Wendell, come on up here, man.
He was just there.
So he just went out. Okay, so Wendell Felder, president of the Ward 7 Democrats. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started finally. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Larry Gordine. Larry Gordine is a substance use specialist at the Psychiatric Institute of Washington, D.C. And we are privileged to have him here to talk about opioids in Washington. Okay? All right. Everyone give a hand for Larry Gordine, please.
All right, my name is Larry Gordine, and I'm at the Psychiatric Institute of Washington on Wisconsin Avenue. And right now, the Psychiatric Institute of Washington is the only freestanding psychiatric and detox hospital in the district. There was the Seton House over at Providence, but they closed a couple of years ago. And so we service and support, and we're committed to all the residents east of the river, in your Ward 7 and 8. And I want to thank Ambrose for giving us an opportunity to have more of a presence with me. And this is over half of the Ward 7 and 8 Prevention Center. They are the ones that are putting this together, along with Ambrose. And the Ward 7 and 8 Prevention Center is essentially committed to community education, community-led leadership, and community change. We got a problem, Houston, okay? On the magnitude of 20 million people, ages 12 or older, have some form of substance use disorder. Surprise, surprise, substance use disorder, addiction has been with us and our community for as long as we can remember. Of course, the opioid crisis just really kind of brought that to the forefront, okay, because of the rapid death associated with it. But addiction has always been a major challenge in our community and in most communities. But our community has its own set of challenge that comes with that, with that disease. Okay, and now we're talking about opioids. Heroin has been with us in the district how long? Definitely too long. When did it really take root?
After the Vietnam?
Excellent. So it really took root in the late 60s, early 70s. Part of it was due to the Vietnam War. Because a lot of the soldiers, right, to deal with the trauma of war, okay, was exposed to and began to use heroin, right? And that came back with them, and as you know, it spread like wildfire, right? All of our major metropolitan areas, especially urban areas, we were hit with the heroin crisis. And the answer to the heroin crisis was methadone. So the only treatment in the early 70s for heroin was methadone. And that's why the methadone clinics have been around over 46 years. All right. What is opioid? Or what is opioid? So it actually comes from a plant, okay, and is a class of drug mainly for pain relief, right? But when it's abused, it can definitely be addictive. And of course, there are different formulations of heroin, just like there are different formulations of all your substances, right? So essentially, the real purpose of heroin or morphine that comes from the opioid is really for blocking pain particularly for surgery. That's the primary use, okay, of morphine. However, it's really can latch on. It's really super addictive, right? And oftentimes, and our health system has been really, has always been overprescribing. You know, the Oxycontin and the Percocet and the painkillers. And that's one of the things for you, and you may have been prescribed Oxy or Percocet, you know, for your pain conditions, and you may have some in your cabinet. Okay? If you do, first you go back home and check your cabinet. Okay? And any Percocet or Oxy that you are not using, okay, you really need to dispose of. Okay? The way that opioids or heroin, the way that it kills, right, is that if you get too much of it, it suppresses your breathing. So it suppresses your ability to breathe. So individuals who overdose and die is really dying from kind of horrible, but it's really suffocation. Okay, that's how this works when you get too much of it. So there's heroin, but there's opioids, there's heroin, okay, there's morphine, there's Percocet, okay, there's Oxy, and then there's fentanyl. Okay, so fentanyl is a synthetic made in the bathtub opioid, right? What is devastating about fentanyl is that it is 1,000 times more potent than heroin. Okay, and that's what's really driving, you know, the deaths now. And it's easy to make, and super cheap, and it's highly profitable for the dealers. It's often referred to as an elephant tranquilizer. That's what it's most often used for. So this really just looks at the potency. And so essentially, fentanyl and carfentanil is 100, and then it's carfentanil, which is 100 times more powerful than fentanyl. The bottom line is, this is really powerful stuff, right? And more impressively, fentanyl and carfentanil has now overcome heroin. So the use of heroin has dropped dramatically, and the use of fentanyl has gone up, and as a result, the overdose deaths continue to climb. And one of the things about the fentanyl is that the dealers are lacing everything with, they can lace marijuana with it, they can mix it with cocaine, etc.
Let me stop right there. We are finding that they are lacing even cigarettes with fentanyl. Yes. So those that are spreading fentanyl are not just spreading it through marijuana or cocaine, they're spreading it into cigarettes. So you know how people sell cigarettes on the street. You have to be very careful because you don't know whether or not those are laced with fentanyl. And if you smoke it and you don't know that you're smoking fentanyl, you could have an overdose. So just understand that.
Or you can, the key is that, not only late, but you can get addicted and don't even know that you get addicted to it. Okay, and the overdose deaths, particularly COVID, just continues, just continues to climb. DC was leading the way in 2016, 2017, 2018, but then had a drop in 2018, 2019. But I think as of 2020, it was like 420 deaths. Okay, that's a lot of deaths when you look at the overall population.
And it's almost double what it was just a few years ago.
Okay, so opioid use disorder is a medical condition. Addiction is a medical condition. It is a brain disease. There is a medical basis for addiction. And continue to emphasize that because addiction and what it does to the individual, what it does to their families, in terms of getting into treatment and staying into treatment, the single greatest barrier is stigma. And what does that sound like? What does that look like? When you put that on yourself. Okay? You know, you didn't have to try that. You didn't have to use that. And just like you started it, you can stop it. Right? That is stigma. Ladies and gentlemen, that is extremely difficult. Okay? To have somebody with a chronic addiction, particularly heroin or opioid, it's like asking them to stop breathing. It is almost impossible, okay, to break that cycle, to break opioid addiction without treatment. And it's one of the few psychoactive substances. You got cocaine, you got crack, you got PCP, all of those are what they call psychoactive substances. In other words, it just really floods the brain dopamine system, right? And most of those you can, through abstinence, therapy, etc., you can get off of those, right? But opioid addiction requires pharmaceutical treatment because it not only hijacks the dopamine system, but it also hijacks your physiological system. So individuals with opioid addiction and trying to get a hit, trying to borrow money or steal money to get a fix, they are really not trying to get a fix to get high. They're really trying to get a fix to feel normal because of what the heroin withdrawal will do to your body. It will drive you to get that fix, okay? So, although we have very effective treatment, okay, still only about 20% of people, actually make it into treatment because there's so much barriers with themselves. One, just knowing that treatment is available. Okay. Number two, where to go to get treatment. And number three is just that shame and that embarrassment. Okay, that they feel like a failure. Because they've lost everything. It's probably the greatest barrier to getting people into treatment. Okay? So we really have to mobilize, really have to educate the community. And we really have to look to these individuals, we have to encourage them to get into treatment. And the quickest way for someone to get into treatment is, encourage them to come to PIW. Because we do assessments 24/7. Okay? We have one place that they can go. Get them there. Encourage them to go there, and then they can get assessed now in terms of where they are in their addiction, and they can get detoxed or get connected to community treatment. The good news is it's very effective treatment for the opioid conditions. There are other treatments other than methadone. Methadone is very effective as well. Okay, and it's not switching one drug for the other. It's the way this drug acts on the brain that you have to treat it. So essentially, it just floods your dopamine system. So how many of you heard about dopamine? All right. So dopamine is what? It's the feel-good gene. It's the love gene. All right. Dopamine is what gets you up and going. Dopamine is what got you rolling this morning. Dopamine is what gets you rolling every day. Dopamine is what keeps you motivated. Dopamine is what keeps you focused. But like everything else, you have to have a balance. Okay? And those dopamine genes or receptors, right, the body does a good job of balancing, just giving you the right amount of dopamine based on your chemistry and what your needs are. Okay, but when you introduce heroin or a psychoactive system drug, it just really floods that dopamine gene, right? It just floods the system with dopamine, right? And the brain just like, oh my God, what is this? And it's so powerful. I mean, that feeling is so euphoric, right? That the gene's like, I gotta have more of that. You are going to get me some more of that, okay? By any means necessary. It is not an option, okay? One of the effects of all addictions, right, is one of the first things that goes is this prefrontal cortex, this area right up here. That's called your prefrontal cortex, PFC. This is where all your executive function lies. This is the portion of the brain, yes, no, stop, go, judgment, discernment, organizing your day, etc. This is one of the first areas that literally gets rewired. And so part of that whole cascade of events, that addiction cycle, okay, is that you almost immediately start losing the ability of judgment and inhibition and control and organizing. And that's why these individuals, once they're in the throes of addiction, they do not make good decisions. They have no control. Okay? They have no inhibition, if you will. So that's manifested as behavior. Okay? But just know, it doesn't excuse it, etc. But just know what these individuals are going through physically and mentally. So it's the equivalent of, it's like becoming a 2-year-old all over again. I mean, they act just like a 2-year-old. All right? And that's how you have to think about it, so that you can have that compassion. They really don't have control, if you will, because of the effects that this has on the brain. Okay, so we talked about the deaths. What was interesting, this quote-unquote opioid crisis really started rolling by 2010, 2011. And there was mostly pills, oxycodone and Percocet. And what happened is that once the individuals, run out of prescription, can no longer get a prescription, right? And then they turn to buy Oxy and Percocet on the street. Oxy is like $1 a gram. And it takes an 80 milligram tablet to do what you needed to do, right? So when you run out of money for that, heroin is the cheapest alternative, right? So people start turning to street heroin, and that's when the deaths start happening, particularly in the Caucasian population. So although heroin has always been our community, right, since post-Vietnam, individuals who were being treated with methadone were somewhat stable. You had deaths, but you didn't have, this kind of deaths, right? So come 2015, 2016 is when the inner cities, and particularly DC, started spiking, because that's when fentanyl was introduced. So we were tolerating the heroin, pretty good. But when they started introducing the fentanyl, that's when the deaths among urban population and blacks in particular started going through the roof. And that's why in DC, it's 84 to 90% of all the opioid deaths is from African Americans.
In everything. And we talk about our young people, they don't know what they're taking. They don't know what they're smoking. They don't know what they're snorting. They take the fentanyl being sold on the street that looks like a pill. It looks like your prescription medication that they crush up, snort, smoke, or shoot. These are things that we got to be aware of that are destroying our community, that we got to be able to build back up and understand. The only way to do it is through treatment. We talked about MAT. Without MAT to help curb those urges, but MAT doesn't work if you don't have coaching and counseling to go along with it. So we gotta have those counseling services and to help. And when somebody's going through that and they need counseling and therapy, having that recovery coach, it has been proven that a recovery coach will help and ease those frustrations. That needs somebody to talk with to explain that has been there, that understands what you're going through. And that's what our recovery coach is all about. I want to make sure that we touch on in a short period